Breathing Obelisk is the latest album from Gutvoid. This is an Toronto, Ontario area band and a death metal band at that. You could call them an atmospheric death metal band, a death doom metal band, a progressive death metal band. There's a lot of different styles that have gone into their work, but initially it was more about connecting over kind of a little bit of Canadian death metal abstraction in terms of progressive death metal over bands like Crypts and Death Doom in that vein, and Finnish death metal in general was kind of where they started. I was kind of in on the ground floor a little bit with this band. Like I'd heard some of their demo or their first EP before it released on Blood Harvest, and then I was able to premiere it once it did, and I did a short interview with the band pretty quickly after that, and appreciated their approach and a lot of what had influenced them over the years. The two folks that started out the band also have interesting other kind of like Demolic inspired bands like Fathomless Ritual, Intestinal Hex, and I think that adds to my fandom because you can hear pieces of their personal touch in this record and in each of their records, but you can also see them extrapolating that into other projects that are just as interesting, although this is probably their most developed and conceptual thing that they've put the most time into, it seems. So for this EP, it's something a bit different. It's four new songs, and each of them emphasize one part of their personality, one thing that influenced them. And really, what they've said about this record is they're leaning into their influences. So we'll cut into a clip here and then see what we can pull from that as far as what they're trying to exaggerate on this song. If you're a fan of their 2022 released record, Durance of Lightless Horizons, as I was, it was one of my favorite records of the year. I was a huge fan of it. Really, where could they go from there? It felt like it was very well developed. It seemed to touch upon all the references that they had mentioned, and it was both straightforward and also out there. It was a little bit mid-paced, very atmospheric, had a lot to sort of work into this style of both hypnotic death doom metal and a little bit of progressive and Finnish death metal in there. It was a nice balance, and I think in a way exaggerating all those elements out into four different songs could only enhance the personality of the band. And really they were trying to go a little bit over the top with this EP. So there's a big death doom metal song out front. You can feel the influence on that one in terms of the way it creeps and shifts and moves around with those riffs. There's a pure death metal song, and their interest in pure death metal, they mention like Mortiferum and bands like that nowadays, and you can feel that too in that second song. From there they go towards progressive death metal that's maybe a little bit more Canadian style leaning. There's some early 2000s prog metal in their work. You can tell they're also quite talented in terms of the full four-piece working together as a unit, and it becomes a little bit more nuanced and certainly more active than some of the other songs. The thing to say about this EP as I go through all these different aspects that they're sort of trying to exaggerate here is that we really just get a bigger Gutvoid album. We get a bigger personality from the band. While it's interesting that they would try to flaunt their influences a little bit louder to show off, to tribute those things, and they end up sounding more like themselves. They end up sounding bigger and on these longer pieces, and I think it was kind of cool to see them go for it a little bit louder and whatnot, and end up with a pretty interesting result. I hear shades of like immolation in some of the songs. I think I certainly lean towards the death doom and Finnish death metal style stuff, but even the more progressive metal leaning side of things was pretty interesting to me. Otherwise, each of these songs lines up with a science fiction short story or novel that represents their general lyrical theme that they put a little bit of a twist on. So I won't necessarily give you the book list here, but there is some additional reading I kind of did to sort of figure out why these books were interesting. At least look into the general synopsis of a couple of these stories and see how they've twisted them in their own voice. I think that's pretty cool that they're using that as a way to generate lyrics. But I guess the next step would be to create their own world and tell their own stories, and that's kind of what they've done by tweaking some of these ideas into different points of view within those stories. I think it's pretty cool. I'm glad to see anyone who actually reads books and is interested in science fiction putting it into their music. I think a lot of people wear themes and interests as scaffolding rather than actual practicum. And so it's cool to see that this actually made it in here, and it seems like they put a lot of work into it. Obviously, I'm a fan of the band, and this is going to get a high score because I'm a huge fan of their sound, and I think they've done right by just adding more to it and exaggerating themselves a little bit and showing off a bigger personality overall on this record. And they've kind of brought a lot more out of themselves for this album, and it would be hard to say that this is better than their full length. I think it's on par with it in terms of the sound, the riffs, the way they've it is death metal after all. They've done a great job with it, and it's interesting to see that this kind of experimentation happening before their second full length, because I think it's helped to direct them into where they want to go next with it. And if this is a sign of how far they'll go with it, or where they want to take certain aspects of their sound and what works and what doesn't, most of it works. It's actually like a pretty solid EP. It's fairly substantial with these more extended songs, and overall, I liked everything about it. It's one of my favorite records of August. It'll be up there on the list for August, and check it out if you will. It releases next week on August 30th, and read my review for more of my thoughts on it.